Afternoon. Welcome to this Hyde lecture from this semester. I'll just read you kind of what we had in mind when we had the series, the topic or the thesis of the series called Information Stimulus, New Paradigms in Planning and Design. And it explores the theme of information stimulus, because now more than ever, the evolution of information technology is being driven by novel means of uncovering, transferring, and disseminating information. Advanced paradigms have emerged through the information drawn from other disciplines and the generation of innovative methods and tools. Examples include climate-related data as they drive resiliency and carbon-neutral projects, precise metering as they change building performance, metrics to measure and enhance health and well-being of building occupants, unique tools for heightening senses and experiencing products, or geospatial information that pushes large-scale consideration, making design more accurate and portraying what is possible. Information also goes outwards. New representational approaches and practices have enabled designers to present information in new and more effective ways, stimulating conversations and helping to find consensus in design and community engagement processes. The 2022-23 College of Architecture Hyde lecture series draws from frontiers of practices to explore how information is propelling the field of planning and design. So with that said, this will be our finishing lecture of the semester. Will be more exciting things on the horizon for the next semester. But for now, I will hand this over to my colleague Jason for the introduction of our speaker.
Thank you, Jan. Get a little bit of space. Well, good afternoon, everybody. I want to say that you are selling out here, and this is wonderful. So it's great to see such an audience. My name is Jason Griffiths, Associate Professor. It gives me great pleasure to welcome Jan Knikker to Nebraska. He's going to talk about the work of MVRDV, possibly one of the most prominent Dutch practices in operation today. Overwhelmingly successful practice, obviously, of buildings that are always provocative, are always stylish, and yet steeped in a discourse of the city of the future. Perhaps their work we consider it engaging, often contentious and often controversial, but always ready to debate. Their work, I believe, typifies those Dutch characteristics of a restless search for sort of international engagement that runs through Holland, a small country, seafaring country that lives by its wits, its intelligence, and its sense of invention. MVRDV, I would say, has kind of re-upped the image of modernism, this sort of combination between sort of conceptual clarity, color, innovative composition, often wit, and this savvy understanding of the role of conceptual art in architecture. Their intentions to detail typify the sort of Dutch kind of interest in the poetics of everyday life, something that reaches back into the traditions of the Dutch masters and through forward. A country I like to understand as one that typifies the most inventive type of football, that is total football. Of course, that will mean nothing to you, but that's a type of football where every player can play in every position in the pitch. Revolutionary football. But that is of no interest to you. So Jan comes to us as the partner and director of strategy at MVRDV. He joined just as the office began to face the consequences of a global financial meltdown, which was an opportune moment to join practice, I would imagine. Prior to that, he'd sort of shaped OMA's public image for nearly a decade. His career began as a journalist, and yet he now drives his business and development and public relations aspects of MVRDV. And is prominent in putting forward and promoting this multifaceted approach to architecture and urbanism. He's lectured regularly around the world: Germany, UK, Israel, Colombia, Austria, Australia, not to be confused with one another, Kuala Lumpur, and many more. In addition to his extensive public relations work, he's also written and contributed to numerous MVRDV publications and exhibitions, also working directly with the founding partners of the practice. He's a member of the HNI Heritage Network and the Gestaltungskunstbeirat, the city of Wiesbaden. Does that sound all right? Yeah. So I want to welcome Jan here. This typifies that sort of restless centre of Dutch inquiry to travel so far from the shores of Holland to the centre of the US and to Nebraska, and to be with us this evening. So thank you very much for joining.
Thank you, and good afternoon to all of you. And I must say, this was on one side the most elaborate introduction of MVRDV with a very nice qualification, and was also the first time ever I heard football being used to introduce us, which apparently doesn't mean anything to you, but right. I also want to introduce MVRDV briefly. We have started, like many Dutch offices, with social housing. This was one of our first projects ever, and we tried to continue with social housing. This is also social housing, making it look better and better, because these days in social housing you would have also people that work for the police or the fire brigade or in hospitals. So social housing should be part of society and not separated. Quite recently we have completed this building. So on the top you have super rich people, and in the bottom, that's still there, you have social housing. So here there is, in France, in one building you have every income that you can imagine, which we think is very important, to not have a polarized society, but to actually contribute to people meeting each other, even in their own home. They all have the same entrance, so it's not like these projects where you read that the poor people have a bad entrance and the rich people have a good entrance. Everybody has a really good entrance here. But we work on all scales, a bit like students, right? So we work on single homes, like this one for a Greek lady in Rotterdam with an olive tree, public buildings, but also we do large-scale urban planning, we do landscape, and also some interiors. And since recently we're also an American practice. We just opened our New York office, and we're working already on a few buildings, like this gigantic brownstone in San Francisco, which is called the Canyon, and where we experiment with prefab panels. Also this one, it's not a render, it's actually built quite recently in New York, radio tower all the way up in the utmost tip of Manhattan, where we have a stack of typologies. It's hotel, offices, and a few other things, and where we use the colors of the surrounding Dominican community. They're quite colorful, and they bring also a lot of color to this part. Also here in Detroit, we're working on this together with an artist, a local artist. We're working on this project, which is going to be executed in printed glass, and a local artist is making this wonderful design. We've been also engaged in the Pulse nightclub National Monument competition, which they found too wild even for Orlando, which was very interesting to hear. And more recently, we're in this competition to put an addition to this IMP building in Portland, Maine. Right, at home, at the Delft University of Technology, we have our independent think tank that is thinking about the city of the future, and I will show you one of their researchers in a minute. But there we have the possibility to dream. Instead of having to deal with budgets or gravity, we can do whatever we like, which is really nice. And here you see the canals of Amsterdam refurbished into biodiversity, so as much as possible coexistence between humans, plants, and animals. And then we basically publish all this research, and it's quite dreamy and never realistic, which is also very nice. But we learn from it, and I'll show you that later. But first, of course, we have to transform ourselves, because we are guilty. As you can see, architects always want to change things, and we are actually a global polluter, so we have to really do something about it. My kids keep telling me, do something about your pollution. And roughly when we started MVRDV in the 90s, it was all about density. We believed that urban sprawl is a big problem, and we believed that basically the densified city would be good enough. Of course, today we have to learn also to make our buildings in terms of materialization and emission much better. But in those days, in the 90s, we thought that density was the main thing, and that has actually laid the foundations below our practice. So here you see what we like to do. We bring suburbia together with the dense inner city, and this is the dream. It's an American drawing where you actually have stacked dream houses, and then you take the elevator down into the city center and the opera. One of these projects we did was the World Expo Pavilion in 2000 in Hanover, which is a stack of Dutch landscapes. So that you have on the 5th floor, for example, a forest. On the roof, you have a dike with water. Just showing that artificial nature in buildings is possible, so that you can really make a densified city, but in a much nicer way than Hong Kong, for example, but that you can actually have parks inside buildings and so on. Another thing we do more and more is transformation. Of course, we need to transform almost any building in the world so that it doesn't use all this energy anymore. And sometimes this is like here in Rennes in France, we have to do this very like almost invisible, and sometimes we can splash out a bit more. So here, for example, they wanted to demolish this building in the port of Gothenburg in Sweden, and we said this is actually quite nice, can we not make it bigger? And because this concrete structure was so strong, we could basically copy it in timber and then put it right on top. And once it's done, it will be so this building actually will not be demolished, and we don't use extra concrete, but we just add and preserve it. And even though it has no historic value, it's very important to not pollute further. However, I will also show you some buildings that don't perform so well, but are conceptually very strong. The high-rise, of course, is one of the tools for the densification of the city. And we also like to say something about it, realizing that we have to be super humble as Europeans. Here you see all the high-rise of the Netherlands in our 4 big cities. And if we say big cities, the biggest is not even 1 million. So we don't really have big cities, but we say we have big cities, and we say we have skyscrapers. However, if you compare them to the skyscrapers of America and Asia, you see that they're merely the plinths of the skyscraper. So maybe our sky is much lower than yours, but in any case, I'm just telling you what skyscraper means to us, like maybe a quarter of yours. So for us, the quest was, how can we improve this skyscraper and make it perhaps more human scale, maybe a bit more European, as opposed to yours and the Asian ones. And at the university, then we started with the voxel to play around with spaces. So we built a skyscraper in Lego, which you can see is not very difficult to do. And the thing with this typology is that you can go inside, you can go up. So in terms of densification, it's fantastic. However, then it can be also quite lonely. Huh? You look out, but you might not meet your neighbors and so on. So if we change this only a little bit, then just one Lego stone we take out. Now you actually have an address halfway through. You can actually step outside, you can look back at the building, and then you can invite your neighbors to have a barbecue. So this is the start of a little village and maybe of social interaction, like we want to have this in this 3-dimensional city that we like. If you now put lots of these values of perhaps the European town, maybe also an American town, into this script, then suddenly you end up with something super interesting, like you see here. So we called Lego, can you please send us 1 million white Lego stones? And they were very friendly, they did so. And so we started to build these porosity towers, the porous city towers. And to us, this has a real parallel with the interaction, but also the way that perhaps Italian mountain villages are built. And so as students of the Y Factory, our think tank then started to build them, as university gave a height limitation so that the students wouldn't be killed if one of the towers would collapse, which is very good. And we built 16 of these towers. You can see them here. They're quite beautiful. And the Centre Pompidou in Paris saw them and really liked them. They're now in the museum there. But with this, our research was not yet done into the porous city. And so we continued doing it. 350 more towers with this idea. We actually called Lego again. They were very friendly, sent us another 1 million Lego stones. And so we then at the university discussed all the qualities of these towers, turned it into a publication. And then something very interesting happened. We were invited to a developer competition between 2 teams in Amsterdam's central business district, the last available piece of land. The city was very unhappy with this part of the city that they had planned themselves, because the housing district, which was separated from the business district, was usually very empty, and the business district after the office hours was also very empty. So they were not happy that there was no life and no urban quality in that area. And now with this last plot of land, they wanted to solve it all, basically. So we needed to be green, public, have offices, have housing, retail. Museum was supposed to be in there, and that meant that not many developers could actually do this, because they couldn't see how to realize this. So we went in with one that is quite interested in sustainability, Edge Technologies they're called, and we looked at this site. So in orange you have the housing, in pink you have working, and then you have the sport fields. So it's at the cross point of these 3 conditions that we wanted to bring together. As you can see here, so the greenery needed to come into this plot. The maximum volume that we could build was way too big, so we turned it into a public and office plinth and some housing towers on top. Then we designed a human scale setup, perhaps in the inner part, which also has qualities in terms of acoustics and wind reduction. We designed a footpath, which is public space, around the central tower. It goes up 5 floors, walks around it, goes down 5 floors. So that is for the city that demanded public space, even though this plot is very small. Of course, we have the cores. The office program can actually be transformed in the future if the lease is over and nobody needs these offices anymore. We already have a plan to split them up into very big loft apartments, and the building can be transformed. Then Piet Oudorff, Dutch landscaper, you probably all know him from the High Line. He came with an elaborate plan to green the building, all the terraces. And we have a public plinth with also a museum inside, which talks about the impact that humans have on the climate. So very politically correct and very important to do this. And this is how we then won the competition. And at that moment, you know, I have to go to these awful real estate fairs, and then I show this image, and then the project developers started to laugh and say, this will never ever happen, because you see this one room out there, it has 6 facades, all the insulation and so on. This will never be built, ever. Way too expensive. And it also will not be so green. Actually, a critic received a critic award by saying that the plants will never be as lush. So we had a bit of work to do, and we were very lucky because we could call Arab, and we also started our internal computing department. And they started to optimize the design that we made ourselves, put it into the script, and started to look at all these things written there. Some of them are really all about construction and making this possible. So here you see one of the models of Arab. Whenever it gets red, it gets bad. It gets green, is good. And it looked in all kinds of things, solar load, the terraces, and also in terms of the Dutch light regulations, which are very strict, that there is enough daylight. And also looking how can we actually make this happen. So for example, normally we would do buildings like that in brick, but that was too expensive, would cost too much time. So we had to use natural stone. And we went for the standard size from the quarry, so that we didn't have to do anything special, so that was no extra money. And then when we analyzed the half-stone pattern versus the irregular pattern, also in a computer, we found out that the irregular pattern had much less cuts needed, so we could work with much more of the standard plates, so that was cheaper. It went down to these kind of details to make this building actually possible. Then we made almost like an urban master plan for the facade. How should these tiles relate to each other? Strict rules, which we do usually in urban planning and not in facade design. And then you see here how from the Revit model we went into the Rhino, made a script in Grasshopper, then re-imported it into Revit, and then we came up with these things. So each plate of the facade had its own code, and we needed to do some corrections because the computer, or our idea of what the computer needed to do, wasn't perfect. So a human being still had to check it up. And then, we could basically send these codes and measurements to the quarry, and they cut it there, and then they sent us per facade section a piece of, a box. And then the construction workers, they could basically unpack the box and then say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, put it onto the facade. They started on top and then slowly went down. And this is how we actually were able to build this without any changes to the conceptual design. The very strange ceiling that you see there has a lot to do with the trash that was that came because we had to cut a few tiles actually, and the computer then told us where to reapply them so that we have near to no waste in terms of this facade material. What was also very nice is that when we visited the quarry, we saw that many of these plates were perfect and others were not so perfect. And then we said, can we have the ones with the mistakes? And the mistakes were actually crystals. And so if the sun shines onto the building, you see them sparkle, which we think is really, really beautiful. But in your bathroom, you probably wouldn't want to have this. So we got away with plates that were much more economic. And if you then look at all the plates that we use, they all have a mistake. So we basically use the entire trash of this quarry, all the waste that they would normally just send into being made into rubble for all kinds of other things. We use them, and because they all have a mistake, they again look very good together. It's a bit rustic, but the design can handle it. And so the construction price of this building was 1,750 euros per square meter. I tried to calculate it. I hope $160 per square foot is more or less what this means. It's a tenth, right, of what we do. See here the concept again. On the outside of the block, you have the facade that reflects the central business district with glass. And then on the inside of our block, you have this human scale skyscraper, which should be overgrown. In terms of organization inside, it's quite, we try to keep it simple, even though all the apartments are different and they all have different terraces. Quite luxurious for the Netherlands, actually, with, for each bathroom you have for each bedroom you have your own bathroom, which we don't normally have in Holland. And of course, many rich people moved in, like this lady who is very big on Instagram, presenting herself. This is the most clothing she wears on her Instagram feed. And so then most of it is just based on concrete and columns. And then from time to time we have a special. I think we have about 15 of these specials which were executed in steel. You see it here in green and then put into the facade. And that's how we made that possible. Beginning of this year we completed the tower, and as you can see it doesn't look at all like the render because the plants are still missing. And that was because Piet Oudorff is actually not working with the computer, so he couldn't put the model into a computer system and check the climate per balcony. We have more than 350 balconies. So how to do that? And he basically decided to have really small plants to start with, because we can't prepare them for rough weather conditions. On top of this building you have alpine climate, and on the ground floor it's very Dutch. So this is how the planting works. So we probably need 4 years before it's really overgrown and green. Here you see the small plants that have to get accustomed. The further you go up, the more Mediterranean the plants go. And of course our developer, this is from their marketing material, they say that there's also a business interest into these plants, because they actually claim that people are less sick if they are confronted with these plants. But you see here, what we wanted to reach is that even though you live on the 10th or the 15th floor, you'll be able to know your neighbors, not just your neighbors above you and below you, but probably also the neighbors in the other tower, because they're pretty close to each other. And that kind of vertical community is what we really wanted to achieve here. Yeah, so you can now visit it in Amsterdam. Should you ever be there, go there and walk this. And then of course we got an award, which made us very happy. Then the thing with these kind of innovations is that they start with very expensive projects, and then the art is to actually make it available to everybody. And that was the dream that we had when we were asked in The Hague by another developer to actually build social housing and affordable housing on a site that was not actually suitable for housing. That's right next to an inner city motorway, and the air quality is too bad. So first we designed a lid for this motorway so that it would be turned into a park. And then we designed two very simple towers that followed exactly the site implications, extruded plans in a way. And then from the top, we went down with our pixelization and tried to make this, this community feeling possible. As you can see, it's not too much, but it's also not nothing. So this is how far we go. Also here, natural stone. And you see the lowest third of this tower is, of both towers is social housing, and then the 2/3 above are affordable housing. So people would pay probably not, in any case, not more than $1,100 per apartment. And the further you go up, the bigger the apartments go. They're for families. And here is a normal Dutch apartment with 1 bathroom. So that's how we normally live if we don't live in fancy buildings in Amsterdam. Yeah, and that's also been recently completed. Here you see the the fancy apartment in the render, and this is the reality. So we're quite happy that we could raise the floor heights 30 centimeters, about this, above the legal standards, which makes the apartments a bit lighter. And also we have these really big windows that even the smallest apartments are good, have a lot of light. And yeah, so this is 655 affordable apartments, very much needed. The city of The Hague, where you see this project, is actually in need of 40,000 apartments. So they're very, very happy that this happened. But then, of course, we design all this. Wouldn't it be much cooler that we could go back to stacking dream houses on top of each other, like you saw in this early drawing? So at the Y Factory in Delft, we actually designed Ego City, where we say it's really good if we can all live in a dream house, but then densified. So we have these 17 students, and they all picked a very remarkable client. For example, there is this desperate housewife from Wisteria Lane, we have Marilyn Manson, we have the guy from The Big Lebowski, and and David Lynch, I see. So they all get their dream house, and this is how the dream houses for these people are then made. And the idea was then that we design a software that would be actually able to put them all together into one very rational tower block. So we made this software. And the thing is that the dream houses then had to be pixelated again. And we love our voxels or pixels. And the software then started to mediate. For example, here you have the bowling alley of the guy. So of course it couldn't be compromised. But how do we mediate between all these wishes? So each of the dream houses had to give a few parameters that were non-negotiable and others were negotiable. And so they put it all together in this Ego City, and then so as they now work all together, they go from Ego to WeGo. So this is WeGo City now, and with new computer technology, hopefully in the future we'll be able to actually customize our apartments much more than we could. So we built a prototype at the Dutch Design Weeks, and with lots of students who then moved in. And for 1 week, they were living in this model of Ego City. The toilets were elsewhere, even though you see a pink toilet there. And they slept in it and had lots of visitors. So it was really good fun to show this. And then can we do this even more radical? So for example, here you have something is made out of nanotechnology, and that's the next thing, that perhaps we don't need buildings anymore out of steel, concrete and stuff like that, but maybe it's just nanotechnology around you, which you can kind of make bigger when you need it and make smaller if you sleep, for example, because the offices are all empty. Well, that's all science fiction, but still very important to think about this. We also talk a lot about the car. In Europe, the car is less and less welcome in our cities. Here you still need it greatly, I believe, even though there is a good bus system. But yeah, the car did a lot of damage to our cities. Here you see the city center of The Hague, just before the 60s, when it had still a lot of 400-year-old canal houses. And then the inner city motorway was built right through it. 800 houses were demolished. So areas that looked like this were actually turned into this kind of area. So you see very idyllic port turned into this kind of thing. Very nice Richard Myers building though. And yeah, these kind of places we now want to refurbish together with the people that actually live there. In this neighborhood, we did a very nice bottom-up project trying to reopen the canals of The Hague and find lots of arguments why this is a good thing. We made a plan for every party. We have 15 political parties in the city council, so we looked at their programs and found arguments why they should all do it. And so we got a feasibility study, and each canal is 35 million euro, and the city says, okay, we don't have the money yet, but they all decided to do this, to actually in the future they want to do it. Here's one of the arguments for the economic party. We said that normally this is the old situation towards the new situation, so there will be a lot of economic growth. We made it all palatable for politicians, that they can understand it and that they actually can support this, so that was very nice. In Oslo, we have another experiment when we were asked to design a master plan with 360,000 square meters, which in China is one building, but in Oslo, a small capital, they were really shell-shocked that there would be so much traffic that would actually kill the city's qualities. We were thinking a long time, how could we prevent this? And on the other side of this master plan, you have Central Station. And we thought, why don't we build this without parking spots? And in a very Scandinavian way, the city said, that's a great idea. Then they went to the director of the biggest bank in Norway and asked him whether he would also come by train instead of the car. He said, yes, great idea, because all the buildings, of course, didn't need parking garages underneath. You see there's water. That would have been extremely pricey. So the city decided to allow this without parking spots, and the director of the bank said, I'm not coming by car, and then nobody else could say, but I need a car. So that worked very well, and then you see this is what the master plan realized, only 20 temporary parking spots, and on the other side is what it actually benefited for the city. So there is a lot of less emission, and the quality of Oslo is actually improving rather than decaying. Also here, a little bit of fighting against the car. This is the city center of Seoul, Korea. Just before we found it, they also wanted to have a High Line. They wanted to turn this inner city motorway into a linear park. Did a competition, which we won with a barcode of anything that grows in Seoul from A to Z in the Korean alphabet. Built this very fast in half a year for next to nothing. Just put flower pots on top. The High Line is a very strong bridge. This one isn't. It's a very weak bridge, only done for cars, not for trains. So we worked with flower pots, but works very well. You can sit on the flower pots. You can also read what's in it, and brings a bit of greenery into this concrete jungle of Seoul. Makes it very nice and is very, very popular. And we didn't estimate that it would be that popular. But having all these people walk over the bridge also was very interestingly an economic given. So people walking, it means money. So KPMG actually did the study. The total investment into the park was 30 million euro. And those two buildings actually grew in value just simply because 1 million people actually pass by every month. And that's a new thing, because normally in inner cities, everybody would say, if you take out the cars, my business is going to go down. On the contrary, here actually the business went up, and also the value of the real estate went up. That was very, very nice. We saw that also in Madrid, for example, when the mayor closed parts of the inner city, because normally we want to walk in a nice place and not smell cars, not be, cars are dangerous as well, so this is a very nice thing. Right. Now I move to something totally different, the outskirts of Rotterdam. Rotterdam is one of the biggest ports in the world. And over the years, it became very long, like almost 40 miles of port from the inner city out to the sea. So people working in the port actually had to move along. And I'm talking about this small town of Spijkenisse, which you probably don't know. In the 1930s, it was still a fishing village. Very nice. Then in the 60s, as they do, they demolished most of it to build dock workers' accommodation, very socialist housing. Then in the 1980s, it needed to look more Dutch and quaint. And in the 1990s, it was more business-like. So there's this ring of layers, like a tree, basically. But in all this time, continuously growing and growing, the city did not invest into any quality. So in all the statistics in the Netherlands, they performed really poorly in terms of culture, attractivity, what else? Education. However, in terms of poverty, not, because people working in the port, they work also at night, and so they are quite affluent. However, it has also the biggest amount of illiterates in the country. So then they asked us to make a library. And how do you make a library? Oh yeah, here you see Paris Hilton. She actually visited Spijkenisse because she had a fling with this guy who is a DJ and Afrojack, and he comes from there. So how do you build a library for this kind of place where there is very little culture and 10% cannot read? So here is a little bit of social engineering that we had in mind. So you have the typical couple in Spijkenisse watching telly. One day they walk into town, they see a mountain of books, they climb the mountain, take some books home, and then they become intellectuals. So that was simply the concept of what we wanted to reach here. And the problem of this town was that it was, they wanted to make money on a public building. So here you have the typical public building, looks like an American one, right? So, and it's good for education. And this is a commercial building that's good for money. And in Spijkenisse, they have a mixed form, and they very strongly believed in it. So here is the cultural center that they built. So if you ask anybody in Spijkenisse, where is your cultural center? They don't know. But if you ask them, where is your Apple shop? They know. They can tell you. This is the entrance to the cultural center. And they also told us the ground floor of our library needed to be commercial. And it can have an entrance with a stair right behind it. So the library needs to be up there. So then this kind of sad thing basically makes the public value go down, and it's more commerce. And we even had a bigger problem because we needed to provide much more of these spaces. So here we start with a supermarket. Then on top of that we have offices for rent, commercial. On top of that a movie theater. On top of that, a chess and bridge club. So all these things we had to put together. So we made this pyramid or cigarette out of it, and then put on top of that the library in red. So that was the concept. And here we hoped that basically the public building is still visible and doesn't lose power because of all the commercial project that it also has to do. The library was then made out of recycled plastic from the agriculture. So the black bookshelves there you see, they're all former plastic pots from our agricultural industry. And yeah, here is how this book mountain was actually given a place in Spijkenisse. So you imagine a community that doesn't really read now has the biggest pile of books visible in the country. It's like an advertisement for reading. And it also needed to connect old and new a little bit. So here's the site. A few of the old buildings are still there. And so in order to even make a bigger difference between commercial and the library, we put this blanket of brick all over everything, bomb. So housing right next to it that we also built is covered in brick, even the roofs. And the commercial stuff is covered in bricks, inside and outside, the same material. The walls of the library are covered in brick. The doors, even the elevator door, the ceilings, everything is brick. And the library is basically on top of the brick. So there is a very strong concept in terms of materialization, so that you actually understand the building, that you know where you are in terms of the library. Then we had to be very polite to the church. We couldn't protect this library taller than the church. You always have to be nice to the neighbors. And so we designed this, what looks like a really big barn and almost like an upscaled farm, which also reflects the agricultural past of this place. It's the biggest span in wood in the Netherlands, 45 meters. Probably in America you do this all bigger and better because you work a lot with wood. But for us this was quite exotic and very beautiful. Very old technology that was used as well. All kinds of names we had to, for each corner there's a very old Dutch name to give it, and this is how it actually then was made. It's also fully circular, so if you go there with a screwdriver, you can basically pull the entire thing apart and reuse the materials. Also very, very green building. It uses a little bit of electricity, but the bad quality of the glass, you can imagine glass, sunlight and books are not a really great combination, but here they actually are, because the books are given to people to read at home, so after 3 years the books are completely trashed. So they can sustain the people less than the sunlight. And furthermore, the bad qualities of the glass, because it creates heat, it creates cold, we actually use by having all these pipes going through, which are also doubling as sprinkler systems. So in summer, they make sure that the water gets hot, and the hot water is stored, and in winter, the cold water is actually collected and stored. And so we use cold water in summer to cool down the building, and hot water in winter to heat up the building. So underneath the building are 2 really big tanks. We also have fig trees and all kinds of other small things to help with the climate, and it's fully computerized, so it actually works all by itself and costs next to nothing in maintenance. Then of course we don't have mountains in the Netherlands. It's a very flat delta, and the psychology of the mountain is a bit manipulative, but you always want to go to the top, as you can see here, famous image. And again here you can climb the mountain, and then while you climb it there will be always books around you. On the top there is a cafe, so many people that are not interested in the library, they also climb. What they also do is that they actually use the stairs, because the stairs are very comfortable, very visible. We've been hiding the elevators a little bit, so again manipulating people to become fit. So you can always take the elevator, but it's a bit more difficult than you would imagine to find it. And here you can actually then walk up surrounded by books. This is the top. You can have a coffee there, but you can also get married, because we, like more than half the Dutch population is not churchgoer actually, so they need other places to marry, and so the library seemed a good idea. And this was the first wedding, also typical Dutch style. You have 2 ladies here in their 50s with all their kids, and they got married to each other in the book mountain. And one of the kids is becoming an architect. He went and had an internship in our office, which was very nice. Now I take you to the inner city of Rotterdam, where we try to reinvent the typology. It's an old trading city, totally bombed by Hitler during the war. In red you see the site of the old market of Rotterdam. And after the war it was rebuilt, but not super interesting. All the money went into the port, restoring business. And then at a certain moment we had this big space that didn't do anything, was always empty. Only when the city organized the weekly market, it came to life. So the city had a great idea to actually have a market hall, so that there would be always life, and they wanted to bring more people living in the city, because there were only 20,000 people living in the city center, and they wanted to move up towards Amsterdam standard, 80,000, to make it more alive. We were called by a developer, can we design a public market? Sure, but we didn't know how to do that, because in the Netherlands you don't really have public markets. So we went to Spain to check it out. And what we learned is that you can make vegetables look wonderful and fruit, so we wanted that. We also learned that if you close the market hall at 12, like the Spanish do, then you close down the neighborhood. That's not what was wanted. And we learned that the Catholics, they're kind of nice in Spain towards chaos, but we didn't want that. That needed to be a Protestant market hall with very clean spaces, very high ceilings, so that people don't feel kind of claustrophobic. So Vinny and the developer went, one of the co-founders, they went and had a drink, and they made the first plan. Here you see a cathedral for the market, and on top a Venetian palace that would finance the market, housing. So the housing was basically financing the market, so the developer went back home and said, we have a winner for this competition, and then his colleagues said, no, we don't have a winner because the market doesn't really bring in rent. There was a cap. They could only ask the same amount of rent as on the outside market. So for 20 square meters, which is one market stall, but this size, actually only 45 euros. So with this little rent, you couldn't build any building. That's why also in Spain the markets are such small buildings made out of steel and wood. Wow. So then they thought these architects are useless, and they made their own design for us. So here you see it. It's a small market hall with condos and rental apartments, 2 slabs, super simple, and this actually they could afford. So here we built a model out of it instead of a computer model, just a physical one that you can put on the table and discuss, and then we started to play around with it. Can we still afford it if we simply turn this around? So now we use the apartments as walls, and we have one level of penthouse on top, and we have a really big market hall, 45 by 45 meter, 120 meters long, almost for free, like a big old Victorian station if you want. So they liked it, and they could afford it, and then they said, can we have more light in the apartments, making that round? Yeah, nice, but what do we do with the elevators? They wanted to have the elevators in the middle of the market. We said no, so we found a kind of a compromise. Then they wanted to have inside the building more ground level rental space, so we made it bigger. And this is how we basically designed this building, slightly like a diagram of what Rotterdam can afford financially. And you see the construction was very simple. It's 2 buildings that can actually stand all by themselves. Then we have one level that connects them, and in 2014, after 10 years of planning and construction, exactly to the day, we actually delivered Market Hall in Rotterdam. So I'll walk you briefly through it. We have commercial spaces and the market. We have 4 levels of parking and 100 units in the center. You can buy, you can go to Spain, very important. You can have American frozen yogurt and Dutch cheese, so it's very nice. It's available to everybody. In the 2 wings, you have the restaurants, very hip places, of course. And then we have this big art piece that connects it all. And you see the gaps in the art piece. They're actually windows from the apartments into the market. So we have 228 apartments. Half of them have a window to the market. Of course, so we have 6 cores, and around each core there are 4 apartments. And as you can see, 2 actually face the market hall, and they all face the city. So they all have an outside balcony. And the idea, the dream was that you could actually lower a bucket with a few euros and ask somebody, hey, put some fish in there. Sadly, that was not possible in terms of the insurance. So we have now triple glazing that you cannot hear the market, you cannot smell the market, but you can see it like a silent movie. It's quite beautiful. And again, we have many different typologies of housing in there. It's 28 different apartment types, and quite a few of them are affordable again. This is, for example, an affordable apartment almost at the top. And then, of course, there is a layer of penthouse apartments, which are very, very big, and also a very big outside space. This is Nicole. She lives there. We always visit her with lots of people. And Nicole has a patio that brings light into the bedrooms, and in the patio you have this glass. And many people were quite scared of it, so we used the baby to show that it's really not dangerous. The baby did not build the model of Market Hall, but one of my my colleagues did. Yeah, so this is how we opened it. And what's very important is that you actually see the art piece. We won the competition with a design where you would have also the art piece on the outside of this building. But the developer said, no, then people will take pictures and never go inside. I mean, it's Rotterdam, a city that was quite poor and had very little visitors. So, okay, so outside we just used the granite of the city. And then we try to make the art print very visible. But the problem, of course, glass is always reflective. So how do you keep it open? Well, it was very simple. We use single glaze, and we do not heat or cool down the market. So it's like in a Spanish market hall, it gets very hot, it gets very cold. It's basically an outdoor space. We had lots of negotiations with the fire department, but they declared it officially an outside space, so we were able to do it. And then of course, we won the competition with a 45 by 45 meter window, which is like 10 floors, and that didn't exist. So we had to find a solution, and what we found was this solution. You see it's very open. It's steel cables that have a pressure of 30,000 kilos, so like 10 golfs, rabbits you call it, I think, or golf maybe, that's a small car. So very high pressure, and in between, so on each crossing there is a knob that actually holds the corner of the glass, and then in between the glass there is silicon, meaning that it's quite flexible. So if a heavy storm hits the building, which we have also in the Netherlands, then in the center the facade can actually be pushed into the building by a meter, which is about this, so it's really a lot. Afterwards it's all soggy, so you have to open hatches and you need to put back the pressure. This is one of these screws, as you can see here, that holds the 4 glass panels and the silicon. Yeah, and fresh air comes underneath the facade inside and leaves all by itself because the market is warm, so we don't even have mechanical ventilation. It's just like a good old fireplace in an old house. This is how it actually works. And yeah, this is how then the Queen opened the building. We were very happy. It might be a bit old-fashioned for you, but we have a royal family and they do a lot of PR. So she walked through the building. We were all singing for her, a bit silly song. But she also brought 450 journalists, lots of articles, and basically it changed the economy of the city, which is also fantastic. Of course, there was a prospective 50,000 tourists a year for our market. At the moment when we had only 350,000 tourists in the city every year. So we had champagne celebrating this, but in the end, actually, we came to 4 million visitors every year into this building, saying that they stay in the market hall for maybe 45 minutes, and then they discover that we have been refurbishing the city and transforming the city for the last 25 years. They started to discover it. All this media said about go to Rotterdam, have a look there. It's a nice city. Jamie Oliver opened his restaurant there, and this is actually how it changed. In the 1980s, the city was on its knees. It had all these big city problems, and it actually started to change. But nobody saw the change. Actually, people were not coming to Rotterdam on city trips and so on. If they would come with a cruise liner, take a bus to Amsterdam or to the Tulips, but never really stay in the city. And our building basically made this big splash and said to everybody, look, Rotterdam is a city where you need to go to. And again, they only stay like 45 minutes in our building and then they see the rest of the city. So I would also like to invite you to come to Rotterdam, experience it, and of course take the selfie. There are like hundreds of selfies every day. We try to collect them, but it's almost too much work. Then I want to end this roller coaster with the last project, quite recent. It's an art depot that we just built and completed in Rotterdam. In Rotterdam we have this museum called Boijmans van Beuningen, which is a private collection by the people that got wealthy in the port. And they at a certain moment gave their entire collection to the municipality. And now it's a municipal art museum. You see it's surrounded by water. And the water also became a problem for this 1930s building, which had basements, and all the collections were in those basements. So here you see the most important artwork of this museum, very good for a city of architecture like Rotterdam, the Tower of Babel by Bruegel. And on the other side you see the museum director during a summer rain in his depot. So the water was pouring in, and between the water and the Dali and Goya's was actually only a few centimeters, or an inch and a bit, to actually preserve it. So the fire department had to come all the time. At a certain moment, the city listened to him and said, okay, we're going to give you money for a vault, basically, a warehouse, a fridge, because the climate conditions inside need to be perfect. But the director said, this is actually a prison for art. We don't want that. We want this municipal art collection to be available for everybody in the city, because the citizens are the owners, technically. And here you see how it worked, actually. We have in the collection 151,000 art pieces, and the museum is quite big, but can only ever show 4% of them. The rest is eternally locked away. And he wanted to really open this collection to everybody and make this art depot big. So he started to collect money in a very American way. We don't do that so much in Europe, that you would have a Pritzker wing to a museum or something like that. But he started to do this in a very good way. And the question was then, how do we make an art depot? And the idea was that it would not become another museum, but really an art depot, but that you can walk through there. So a public art depot. So he found money, quite a bit actually, and the people that gave the money is a foundation in Rotterdam, and they said, you need to realize this right next to the museum, so that people are not confused and that they don't have to travel to another place, but that it needs to be there. The problem with this location was it's a park designed by Rem Koolhaas, the Pritzker-winning architect from Rotterdam. And we had lots of neighbors that were all against this building. Actually, everybody was against this building. So we entered the competition. And we have Boijmans, we have the Koolhaas building, Kunsthal, a big hospital, and other museums. And so we needed to kind of be polite to all of them, but very difficult. So the site was there, a former orchard. And the first thing we have to respect is the bicycle path to the other museums. And then we have this enormous, massive volume of 15,000 square meters, or cubic meter even. And the thing with this competition was very strict, that if you would go above budget, you would be disqualified. So whatever we designed, we had to send to a cost consultant. They sent it back and said no, because the budget was so low that we could not afford anything. At a certain moment, we gave up, and we basically sent this block to the cost consultant, and again it came back and he said no, too expensive. So then my colleague, very smart, analyzed the entire thing and found out that we could not save any money, for example, in the MEP. It's an art depot, it's a fridge, so we need that function. But she found out that the facade was crazy expensive because it was up to a certain museum standard. So you need to be able to drill with an electric hammer into this thing without it giving in for 5 minutes, which is a bit weird because today it's all electronic, so why do we need so much concrete? But that was just something we had to respect. And so, seeing the fact that the facade was the most expensive, we then found a way to save on the facade by simply turning this entire thing into a cylinder, which was for an art depot certainly not the most efficient thing, but opened a lot of ideas about poetry and things that actually could be done in a beautiful way. So we sent it back to the cost consultant. Cost consultant sent it back and said, congratulations, you're back in the game. And actually, you're very much below the budget, so you can start to play now, which we did. So we wanted to be very careful with the park and with Rem Koolhaas design. So we made it much smaller on the bottom and much bigger on the top. So there is a 20-meter distance between the two. It's actually a 10-meter cantilever all around. And that made a big roof possible, where you can use the roof, actually. We wanted to do that. Also, it's polite to every neighbor. It doesn't have a front or back. So everybody has exactly the same experience with this building. Then at a certain moment came the idea, because it's also an art museum next door, it's a park, can we not turn this entire thing into a sculpture? So we wanted to execute it in reflective material. Yeah, you know this one, that was really the inspiration. Of course, we were dreaming to have it totally seamless, but with our budget, that was totally impossible, but still it's reflective. And when we made the first tests with models, we actually saw that you can look around the corner. You can see things that you cannot see when you stand there, because there are buildings in between. But if you look into the building, you can actually see the trees on the other side, which was fantastic. Towards the top, it reflects the sky, so the volume actually dissolves. And then at night we wanted to have these windows that would appear because, and not over day, because they have a reflective layer. So all in all, very well. We had some problems with trees. They were on the site, and we promised everybody that we would put them onto the roof. But then there was a tree expert saying that those trees, they won't survive on the roof. So instead, the trees were moved to another place in Rotterdam. No tree was harmed building this. And we started to prepare birch trees that could actually sustain the wind. So this is how we won the competition, with this beautiful image of the building. We were lying a bit because there was no money for the forest on the roof. So that was our guess. But we were within budget, but well, we were not really within budget if you think that. But we found €1.5 million to actually pay for the forest on the roof. Then it was cast in concrete on the site, but only the first 2 layers. The art will start at 8 meters altitude. Rotterdam is a city below sea level, so if it ever floods, this is the height of the water that will reach. Hasn't been flooded in 400 years, so we hope we won't start this now, but one can never be too careful. And from that height onwards, you see that we have prefab panels, insulation on the outside, and then on top of that we have the double bent panels that reflect. And it's really beautiful because here you look into the west and you can see the sun coming up in Rotterdam, which is again very poetic, we think. And also here was a little bit of parametric design by our computing department, because the hospital was heavily opposed to this building, because right next to the site there is a psychiatric ward for young children and for adolescents. And of course, with the reflection, maybe people could actually look into that. The hospital didn't want that, or the patients could see themselves. Also, that was deemed way too difficult. So what we did, we looked at the entire building, and from every angle that you can possibly see yourself or into this garden and into the windows, we have this reflective layer. So here you see it's matte. It's a sticker that we put on top of the reflective layer so that you don't look into this hospital. And should the hospital ever move, we can peel it off and make it visible again. Well, last year the king then finally opened it, so they share the work, the king and the queen, with a big show. And here you see our king in the laboratory coat that he has to wear to protect the art, right to a nude, which he had a lot of fun with, as you can see. So we opened it, and then walking in there, so this is how the art arrives actually. There is a lock. So 95% of the building is public, except for the loading dock and the quarantine and the security. So here you see the loading dock. They have to be very precise, and we have these beautiful big doors. They're a bit like bus doors. They can close totally and are absolutely invisible. So at night you only see the shape, you don't see where the doors are, which is also very nice. Inside you enter in an art piece. The wardrobes and the entire entrance is designed by this artist who also did one of the, sorry, it might be the jet lag, but I just totally lost his name. Yeah. Well, anyway, he does wonderful things, and also we have this Escher-like atrium over the full height of the building. Here you see it, and also here it's not just an atrium with vitrines, but it's also an art piece and an experiment in a way. This lady, Marieke van Diemen, at least I know her name, she actually designed the constellation of these boxes, and also what you wanted to achieve is actually that the art is seen in different ways here, because it's not a museum. You need to be able to see the art differently. For example, you look at the art from below. You can walk over the art, which is also a fantastic experience, that you actually walk over it. You can see it from the front, but also from the back. Here, for example, a very precisely made portrait, but a very rough name on the back side. Also lots of stickers on the back that you can see what exhibitions the art piece actually had gone to. I didn't know that the art also had a life on the other side, which is really nice. And of course, this is not a museum, but an art depot, so this information is almost more important in this place than actually looking at the art. Then there's a business model, which is also super nice. One of the floors is for private art collections. Here you see the interior of one of them. They're much more liberal with moving it around, so every time you go in there, they just drag the racks in and out, which is super cool, and you'll be able to see them differently. So yeah, 151,000 art pieces, and every visit is totally different. You always see different things. Also nice is that the art actually uses the same way that you use, and the same elevators and so on. So here, for example, somebody came and said, you need to go, you make space, because there is a Mondrian coming through, and a very expensive painting, and then it was put onto into the lock. Yeah, from the atrium you can look into the depots. You also see the light switch, so you can switch it on yourself so that you see inside. And the art is not curated inside, but it's basically practicalities. So per material there is a different climate, and per size. So here you have, for example, organic materials large, wherever there is space, the computer has decided where to put the art, and that leads to very incredible meetings between art pieces. Here, for example, there was a tour of the Minister of Agriculture of Germany and of the Netherlands. The lady in white is the Agriculture Minister of the Netherlands. They brought their families, and they had a lot of fun with this art piece, which is an airplane with all gender genitalia. And the girls, adolescents, they laughed a lot about it. But what I thought was really interesting is that actually right next to it there is this beautiful dress. And that dress survived in this violent meeting of those two art pieces. And it's really cool what it does, because things that would never meet each other in a museum, in the depot you actually see. And that does something if you see two things next to each other, because you start to compare them in your mind. And so it's a totally different art. Here it's overwhelming. It's like your Instagram feed is gone wrong because you walk 10 meters and you have the entire art history coming at you like a tsunami. It's really like overwhelming and really, really beautiful to see all that. And they have all these fantastic art pieces here. Again, very classic meets very modern photography. Right next to each other, things that would never meet in a museum, you see here. And also their own collection, they do move a little bit. They make sure that it's not always the same rack, but here is one of the curators. They always come with you. You can visit the art depots also from the inside. Actually, 14 people, 10 minutes, and then the art has to, the air conditioning has to work half an hour to restore it to the normal level. And because they have a way too good air conditioning, so you go in there for 14 minutes, it goes a bit down to the normal level, the legal level, and then you have to go out and it goes up, so that everything is well protected. Well, this guy actually pulled one of the racks, and then the German Minister of Agriculture had a very nice moment with this Monet, and she was super happy, and this is certainly a visit that she will never ever forget in her life. So you have a totally different way of interacting with the art in this building. Also here, that was for me very special. Just like it's no big deal, there was this painting, and I know this painting because it's the painting that was kind of looted by this publishing house for Christmas cards. So you see here, see a small part of that which is in there. Super nice. Also very good in the museum is that there is no more back of the house. You have all these people that work in a museum that are never seen. For example, the restoration studio. So they have a super modern now. They used to be in the basement. Now they have daylight. And the nice thing is that if a painting is restored, it's still on view, because you will be able to see it, because they now have to work in the shop window. When we came with the idea, they were all heavily opposed. But once they actually had to work there, they loved it. And as you can see on the tables in front, they make their own small exhibitions. So they became, in a small way, also curators. And it's also used to test installations. Like here is an American artist, Paul McCarthy. And he, very rude installation. You have no idea what's going on in that thing. I can't tell you. You have to go. But it's rather rude. and it's moving up and down, and it's very loud and has a lot of tremor, and here they actually can test it, see whether they can put it into the museum. They also test new ways of showing art. This is what they copied from the building by Lina Boradi in Sao Paulo, basically to have glass panels and put their work on there, which is very daring because this is one of their most important works. But also here you see then on the backside all the stickers and things that show the history. Very important for this museum. Rotterdam is a polarized city. We have the river going through it. In the north you have the more affluent neighborhoods. In the south, the poor neighborhoods. People from the south hardly ever come over. And whatever the museum tried to bring them over, it never worked. So now, basically, they bought a bus and they bring the bus to schools and get the school children to visit the museum, so that at least the next generation might be interested in art. And in this space, they actually then build up this way with the art. So they get a catalog. They can pick their favorite art piece, cut it into pieces, and then make a personality like in Instagram or TikTok. So here is a girl called Jasmine, 16-year-old, who cut out this person which became an influencer that can fly and is really into French fries. So that's a nice way to actually deal with art, and very important. And then totally different, we have this restaurant on the rooftop, which is designed by interior architects called Concrete. It's fighting for a Michelin star. So you have these two worlds in the same building, very important. Of course, we have the public rooftop. Here you see it. You can see the city of Rotterdam, which is ever changing. You have to go there every 5 years, otherwise you think what's happened. It's like the most Chinese city in that sense, that it grows so quickly. You can take the ultimate selfie with the right side of the camera because you are reflected in the restaurant. And yeah, here we actually then brought the trees that were prepared in 4 years' time to live on the roof, and they grow very well. Actually, the root packages, they are grabbing each other so that not one tree will go during a storm, but either they will all stay or will all go. So. Which we hope won't happen. The forest also has a second rather weird function. It's actually one of the many things we do in a building to save the planet, which in a big fridge is difficult, but here actually the rainwater is filtered and then goes into the toilets. So they have to now put signs in because the water is yellow, so everybody started to flush and then understand, oh, it's not somebody else's water, but it's from the roof. So now they say, don't flush before you see this, which is kind of double because it might still be pee by somebody else. You never know. So yeah, but that's the function. Yeah, so here you see the top with all the trees. It's quite beautiful. If you walk there, and many people take selfies. That was never the idea, but it's quite Instagram savvy. Also at night, you see they invested in another art piece there, by Pippi Lotteris, the Swiss artist. Here you see her, also remember her name, very nice. And at night she has these projections that play with the space in front of the museum, but also with the reflection of it. And what's really beautiful is that whenever people are in this projection, they start to become kids again. They run around hectically and they have a lot of fun. And that's also the idea that architecture is actually making you happy, that it lifts you up, that it brings your city something positive, and simply that it improves your life, and that maybe it makes you smile, but it is also a very serious building because it has all this art. So we want a market, a library, an art depot to actually help you love your city, improve your life, and see that this public idea, public building is really that you can have a personal relationship with this. So yes, and that's thank you for your patience following me on this crazy roller coaster ride through our work.
And thank you for that wonderful tour through the work.
Have you to
Right.
over for the
Q&A session. Yeah. I'm going to ask a student to ask.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I can. We can do the dialogue first, and then we can pass it around. Okay, so we're gonna do it slightly differently. This time we'll have our speaker joining us at the front of the thing, and we'll have a dialogue, and then we'll open it up for questioning towards the very end.
Design of furniture.
Right.
So yes, this is our opportunity to ask questions. So I'm going to ask Jacob to hand the mic around. So I want to open the floor to questions from the students.
Yep.
Yeah.
And perhaps when you do that, I'll start with a couple of questions. So it's quite interesting that you involve a lot of scripting, grasshopper things in your design, and to the point where almost becoming, in a sense, becoming a tech company. A percentage of you, at least. How do you manage that aspect of your expertise?
How do we manage it? Well, we were very lucky that we had architects that are tech savvy and are interested in more than just architecture, and they are really going into the programming. So we don't really have programmers in-house. We only have architects that are super talented with computers. So it became very natural because they started to fiddle with scripting, and at a certain moment we realized that they make the buildings feasible. Because we also, for every building that you saw here, we have at least designed 20 things that were not built, and quite often they're too wild, too not feasible, and so on. And they actually help us. So at a certain moment, in many corners of the practice, we had these people, and then we decided to put them all together and call it MVRDV Next, New Experimental Technologies. And it's parametric design. And when I wanted to, well, it was funny, when I wanted to publish it in a parametric design magazine, they told us, that's not parametric design. Parametric design is like Zaha Hadid's work. It's like blobby and organic and so on. So we had to fight very hard with them until they understood that our depot is also parametric design.
Yeah, thank you. Do we have questions from the audience? I guess I'll continue with one other things that we talked about earlier is how in certain areas you feel like you're kind of influencing, informing the local practice, with obviously this very interesting, almost like urban design on a sort of microscopic scale, or architectural level scale thing. But there are certain places where, the shifting in philosophy is actually influencing your work. Can you maybe talk a little bit about that too?
Not sure.
Yeah,
I fully understand where you want to go.
Yeah, so we were talking about, for instance, in China, how there's a shifting in philosophy in terms of renewal and.
All right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that was already. I said that in the beginning we believed that sustainable architecture was all about density, and now we have to learn to build circular with organic materials and so on. So that was one of these changes. But we discussed this morning that, for example, in China, we were asked to be European architects because they wanted to buy European architecture, and at a certain moment they had quite a bit. So they needed other things from us, which was very interesting. And we became almost a bit selfish in China because we understood when the EU came with heavy tendering regulations that in China it wasn't like that. So we could design still opera houses that we would never be invited in Europe to do. And today we saw that we work in China a lot on transformations, which becomes more and more important. They have now this enormous building stock, which is 40 years old. If they start to demolish it, like we would do in many parts of the world with old buildings, then the planet is in even bigger trouble because it's because of the sheer amount that they have now in 80s and 90s buildings that they built very poorly. So now our function in China, and perhaps also the biggest argument why we work there, is to actually participate in renovating these buildings and giving them a second life, and also telling them, look, this is your history. In China everything is much faster, and in Europe, if we think about preservation, it's usually 200 years ago or something like that. But now in China we telling them, look, what you have in the beginning from your industrial revolution, like 40 years ago, that is also a good thing to preserve, not just culturally, but also in terms of sustainability.
Okay, let's have
There's a couple of questions over there.
Okay.
Yeah, you need the mic.
When you first started off your design career, did you think that you would be doing what you're doing today, or like working on such amazing projects? that like you are? Did you think you'd be doing that?
I think everybody who comes to MVRDV has this expectation, and sometimes the expectations is even bigger than the reality. So you have people that come and they hope they will build, I don't know, market halls, and then we tell them, okay, we have this office building in Germany in a province town, can you make something really special about it? And then they are frustrated. I wouldn't call us architects, even though many people do, because we still work against normal budgets in normal projects. So what we always need is a client who actually wants to do something really special. So yeah, we have this ideal that we don't want to specialize into one thing, but like if you come from university, your professor has asked you to do anything, right? So you come out of university thinking, I can do airports, I can do design a kitchen, and that's what we still do. So in that sense, we've never grown up. So
Yes.
What was your favorite country to do architecture in?
I can't really answer that. This is like asking a mother, which one is your favorite child?
But perhaps if we rephrase that question a little bit, how does the design processes and expectations influence the outcome of your design in certain places?
Yeah, of course. No, so if you look at it from this way, and also perhaps this jump in scale from very small residences to entire cities, and working globally, then you see that we learn a lot from one to the other. So we built, for example, a small rooftop extension in Rotterdam, and then talked to the city of Paris to introduce this as a new law for the entire city, that you could put rooftop extensions on there. So if we come to a country, that also means that we have to hire people from that country, because people live differently. Huh? For example, building homes in India means that you always have the kitchen right next to the entrance for cultural reasons. So you need Indians in the team to actually tell you that. Otherwise, you make the architecture that's not functional. And but bringing Indians into your team then also has consequences for all the other things. So we have these international teams where people inspire each other to come up with solutions that might not be. So if, having an Indian architect work on a German office building, which is good fun, because they bring something that the German team wouldn't bring.
So just in the interest of time, I know we have to vacate the room very, very shortly. So this is our version of a culture of congestion. I want to just conclude with one question about the depot, and maybe we could make it concise. That building seems to be predicated on the idea of reflectivity, different levels of reflectivity, and of course it's in a very controversial position in terms of the history of architecture. I noticed you had to turn down the levels of reflectivity in areas where people didn't want that level of exposure. I'm wondering, as the former representative of OMA, what was the position on upping the level of reflectivity for the Kunsthalle, for Rem Koolhaas and his perhaps narcissism? Did you have to make it very reflective next to looking at the Kunsthalle? Or?
The Kunsthalle is hidden behind trees, so that's
Right.
not an issue now. I think the idea is that this building wants to respect the park so much that it's not actually there. And if we would have had the means to work seamless, like you have in Chicago, then it would have been much more invisible. But it's doing a good job. You look at the building, it's there, yes, but you also see yourself. You see the city, you see the sky, you see the surroundings, and so that is basically dealing with Koolhaas, the work of Koolhaas. He actually said about the building that it's not a catastrophe. Whereas his girlfriend said it's a carbuncle.
Okay, we can talk more about that. It'd be very interesting. I just want to ask everybody one more time to thank Jan for a wonderful presentation.
Thank you very much.